In this recording, you'll find answers to the practice test problems, including explanations of how to arrive. First thing you want to do in this problem is substitute, but when you substitute, you really need to make sure you use parentheses, because you want to make sure that you're cubing everything that x and y are, or squaring for y. So we'll do -5 squared plus 1. If you don't use parentheses when you substitute, you're going to get the signs wrong. So remember that to cube something or to raise something to the third power means to multiply it by itself 3 times. So -2 times -2 times -2. This is -8 plus, a lot of people tend to distribute here. You're not distributing. You only distribute if you don't know what would be inside the parentheses, but I do. So I'm going to follow order of operations. So I'm going to square -5, which would be positive 25, and then plus 1. I continue to follow order of operations, so I'm going to finish my parentheses and get 26. And then multiply before I add. So I'm going to get 78. 3 times 26. And then if I add -8 plus 78, I would get 70 for my final answer. If you didn't use parentheses here, you'll still get a negative. But here you just need to make sure that that's in parentheses, because that means to do -5 times itself. Here, y is being multiplied by itself, and y was -5, so -5 times -5. On the next problem, before I start, I'm actually going to rewrite subtraction as adding a negative. So that would be right here. And then again, you have to make sure you follow order of operations all the way through. Anything you're not doing just comes down. And I'm starting by minusing or subtracting 6 and 4. If you take a look at the exponent, it's outside the parentheses. It's still outside that parentheses. So if I keep working, my next job is to square 2. That would be 4. I'm going to keep going with the parentheses to get 6. And now I'm going to multiply before I add. So I get -24, and then 1 plus -24 is -23. So to decide if a number is a solution, this is asking if I change x to 7, would it be a solution? I'm going to plug that in, bring everything else down. So -21 plus 6, I'm hoping, is greater than -16. -21 plus 6 would be -15. Keep the sign of the bigger number and subtract. And this says that -15 is greater than -16, which it is, because it would be farther right on the number line. So then, yes, it is a solution. On the next one, to see if something represents a function, you have to determine if each input, which is 4, 5, 6, 7, has one output. So 4 does have one output, it's -2. 5 does have one output, it's -8. 6 does have one output, it's -2. And 7 does have one output, it's -8. So this is yes, each input has one output. A lot of people say no, because the output of -2 and -8 repeat. Nowhere does it say that that can't happen. The important piece is that each of these numbers, when you put them in, only one possibility can come out. So to identify the range is all output values, or all possible output values, which is actually the y's. So I'm going to look at each ordered pair, and so I have -1, 3, 0, 0, 1, -3, and 2, -6. And then since I'm looking at the range, I'm only looking at my y values, and I'm just going to list them. So the range is 3, 0, -3, -6. The reason you wouldn't use an inequality is because there's only 4 singular points. They're not connected with a line showing that it could be all those infinite spaces in between. It's just these 4 spots, so there's only 4 possibilities for y. So if I'm solving an equation, my goal is to isolate x. The first thing I'm going to do is simplify by distributing. So -6x plus -8 minus 3x equals 5x minus 1. Then I'm also going to combine like terms, which I have -6x and -3x, which combine to get -9x minus 8 equals 5x minus 1. Notice I didn't show any work actually to get that. I just combined them to make that. My next step is to move one of my variable terms over. So I'm going to move over the 9x by adding. I also could have moved over 5x by subtracting, but that would have been a negative, so I didn't want that. So I'm left with -8 equals 14x minus 1. Add 1 to both sides. -7 equals 14x. And then the last step to isolating x is to divide by 14 on both sides. Bring down my equal sign. X is isolated, and negative 7/14 reduces to negative 1/2. On this example, the first number I need to get rid of is 3, so I'm going to do that by minusing, because 3 minus 3 is 0. I still have that negative sign in front of x, and then negative 12 minus 3 is negative 15. All I really need to do is make that positive, so if I change the sign on the left, just change the sign on the right, so x equals 15. You could also think of this as a negative 1 bothering x if you want to put that in there, and then you could divide both sides by negative 1. So on this one, to use reverse PEMDAS, the first thing you'd have to do is get rid of 14 by subtracting it from both sides. So negative 2x equals negative 24, negative 10 minus 14. Divide both sides by negative 2. X would equal positive 12. Just be careful on a problem like this. There's a lot of sign things going on, negative minus a regular, and then dividing by a negative. In this problem, I'm first going to get rid of 5 by subtracting, because we're going to reverse PEMDAS, and negative 2/3 is multiplying x. So I bring that down. So because this is multiplying x, I could divide, but when you divide by a fraction, the order matters. You have to make sure that when you're dividing negative 16 by negative 2/3, and you write that left to right, that this comes first. Instead of doing that, the shortcut, when you divide fractions, is to multiply by the reciprocal anyway, so the shortcut would just be to do that at the start. So multiply by the reciprocal, which is negative 3/2. You can actually see that negative and negative make a positive, and then your 3's cancel and your 2's cancel. So x is completely isolated. You could multiply across, or 2 could become 1, 16 could become 8. Negative times negative is positive, positive 24. We're going to start this next example by distributing. 4x plus 6 equals 18x plus 6. And I want to move over my 4x. I could minus 18x, but that would make it negative. Bring down my equal sign. I'm left with 6 equals 14x plus 6. So I'm going to get rid of this 6 right here. That's bothering y by subtracting it from both sides. Bring down my equal sign. That should be the first thing that should always come straight down. And then 6 minus 6, there's actually an answer to that, 0. And 14x. I'm not done yet because x isn't isolated. Divide both sides by 14. Bring down my equal sign. X now is isolated, and 0 divided by 14 is 0. A lot of people stop here because it looks funny, but x isn't isolated. Keep going until x is completely isolated. This problem has an answer. It has a number that x can be. It just happens to be 0. So on the next one, we're going to distribute again. And then subtract 12x from both sides. You could add 20 or minus 18, but I promise it's better to do variables first. So then you're left with negative 20 equals 18. You don't have to do anything anymore because the variable's gone, so you're not trying to isolate, you're done. You just have to interpret this as an answer. So this says that x can be 0. This doesn't say that x can be anything because the x is gone. So we have to take that a step further, which since negative 20 and 18 are not equal, that means no solution, which means that there's no value that x can be. So when we have two equal fractions, that means we have a proportion. And to solve a proportion, you cross multiply. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to show that I'm cross multiplying here and here. The key is that the 2 that's this denominator has to multiply all pieces of this numerator. So we're going to put it in parentheses so we can distribute. And when you cross multiply, you make an equation. And then the 4 here needs to multiply all parts of the other numerator, so 2x plus 6. Now we have an equation with variables on both sides, so you just distribute 12x plus 4 equals 8x plus 24, subtract 8x, subtract 8x, 4x plus 4 equals 24, minus 4, 4x equals 20, and then divide by 4, divide by 4, x would equal 5. So in this problem, we're being asked for a percent. So you can either do is over of equals percent over 100. The 100 never changes. We're being asked for the percent. It's of 625, so that would go on the bottom, and 130. You can also think of this, it might be easier, as part and whole. So the whole student body was a 625. The part that said yes was 130. And then to solve it, we're going to cross multiply. So 625x equals 13,000. divide both sides by 625, and we would get x equals 20.8. So 20.8%. Simplify the square root of 44. We want to break it up into two numbers that would multiply to equal 44, but we also know the square root of one of them. So it'll be 4 and 11. And then the square root of 4 is 2. 2 radical 11. There's a how-to video on how to simplify radicals in Google Drive that walks through all the possible scenarios regarding radicals. So to find x and y intercepts, you replace the opposite coordinate with 0. So if we're finding the x-intercept, we're going to change y to 0. And most people just skip to this part, negative 6x equals 30. Divide by negative 6, divide by negative 6, it's 0. So then x would equal negative 5. That's my x-intercept. If I wanted to graph that, by the way, that would be 5 spaces over, touching the x-axis, so about over there. And to find the y-intercept, we change x to 0. And then most people just skip to this part where it would say 3y equals 18. Divide both sides by 3, y equals 6. And if you wanted to graph that, that would be up 6 on the y-axis up there. There's also a how-to video, x and y intercepts, in Google Drive. So to find the slope, because it's 2 points, we're going to use the formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. M is our slope. So the first thing I would do is label these ordered pairs. And then I would actually set up what I call the subtraction fraction. So the fraction with a subtraction. So that's this, and then these two minus signs. And now I'm actually going to change color to start putting in. So first I need to replace y2, which is 6, minus y1, which is 1, then x2, which is 2, minus x1, which is negative 4. So even though this minus is here, that's part of the formula. x1 was a negative number. And then now you can change things if you want. 6 minus 1 is easy, that's 5. But if you want to change minus negative to plus positive, you get a slope of 5/6. So as long as the equation is in slope-intercept form, which means y is isolated, then you can easily identify the slope and the y-intercept. The slope is always the coefficient of x, which in this case is negative 3. It doesn't always come first, it's just always attached to the x, and it's negative. And the y-intercept is always that number that's being added or subtracted, so in this case that would be 4. On this kind of example, if you want to write it in slope-intercept form, first you have to isolate y, so we'll minus 2x from both sides, and you get negative 4y equals 12 minus 2x. And then we're going to divide by negative 4. So now y is isolated. You can do the beans. 12 divided by negative 4 is negative 3. Before I go any further, I'm going to change that to plus negative. Bring down my plus sign that I just made, because now I have a negative 2 over negative 4, which would be positive, because you have two negatives, and you have 2/4, which would reduce to 1/2. So now, if you were being asked to identify the slope, that would be your 1/2, and your y-intercept would be negative 3. So on this problem, as soon as you hear right triangle, your brain should be going crazy saying, oh, I know what that is, Pythagorean theorem, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And they actually say we're finding the hypotenuse, which is c, and that the legs are 3 and 4. So the legs are a and b. Plug those in, so you get 9 plus 16 equals c squared. If I keep working down, I'm going to get 25 equals c squared. I'm going to bring that over here. And you're not done, because c isn't isolated. So the last step is to take the square root of both sides. Square root of c squared is c, square root of 25 is 5. The key component here is that even if you're finding a leg, the formula never changes. So you just have to be careful that if you're given the hypotenuse, you'd replace c with that number. And you might see it like, if you actually have a picture of the triangle, maybe this is 5. You would need to know that based on its location across from the right angle, that that's the hypotenuse, and that would take the place of c. So in the next problem, to decide if they could form a right triangle, we'll use the Pythagorean theorem again. And the easiest way to do it is to just put the numbers in increasing order. But if you don't, you need to know that the biggest number, if it was a right triangle, would have to be the hypotenuse, which is c. So that number has to go there. You don't have a choice. Then you start doing the math. 49 plus 64 equals 81. I'm going to bring down my equals 81. And we get 113. Since the Pythagorean theorem didn't work, then the answer is no. They could not form a right triangle. So this time to find the slope, since it's on a graph, I'm going to use rise over run. And the rise is that vertical distance, so that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. And the run is the horizontal distance, which is going to be 1, 2. And if I simplify that, I get 2. But then if you just look at the line in general, the line itself has a negative slope, so I'm just going to throw that on in the end, -2. So to graph using slope-intercept form, the first thing you want to do is identify the slope, -2/3, and the y-intercept, which is 5. So this just tells me how steep the line is. This actually tells me a point on the line. It says that the line would touch the y-axis at 5. So I can put a point there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the slope tells me that to get to the next point, I would rise -2 and run 3. So from here, I'm going to go down 2 over 3 and put a point. And I could do that again. And then I could actually go the other direction. We go up and over. And then connect to the line. So direct variation, as soon as you hear that, you should be thinking y equals ax, which is really slope-intercept form, but your y-intercept is 0 because there's no plus anything right here. So we're going to isolate y. First we can add 8. You add 8, and 0 plus 8 is just 8. And then we can minus 3x. You could have done the opposite order. You could have minus 3x and then add 8. 8 minus 3x. And now that y is isolated, since the y-intercept is 8, then it is no, because b is not 0. So in this kind of a problem, you want to go through and identify keywords and phrases and translate them into something mathematical. So 3 times is going to mean to do 3 times something multiplied. Difference, I don't know why everyone thinks that means to divide, but it means to subtract. But also, because it's the second keyword, we need to use parentheses. And the thing that we're finding the difference of is 5 and a number y. So 5 and y. If you go back here, it also says 3 times the difference. So 3 is multiplying the difference. So you need to do the difference first and then multiply. And then is at most 40. So if something can be at most 40, it could be 40 or less. So that would be your final answer. You could also see it without the middle dot. So it would just look like that, a little bit cleaner. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to distribute. Just that's all it's asking for.